To the world, he was this incredible humanitarian, a king who seemed to be pouring his own massive fortune into building amazing things for his people, for the betterment of all mankind. But behind that philanthropic mask, there was a secret, a private empire that was built on a Holocaust that, frankly, history has tried its best to forget. So, back home in Belgium, King Leopold II was a rock star. They called him the Builder King. And you could see why. He was using this incredible wealth to fund these spectacular public projects. We're talking palaces, beautiful parks, huge, grandiose arches. He really sold himself as this visionary, a guy completely dedicated to progress and civilization.
But where did all that money come from? Well, that's where the story takes a really dark turn. It was a complete horror story. In his personal colony, the Congo Free State, Leopold was in charge of this absolutely brutal system of forced labor and pure terror. And the human cost? It was just catastrophic. We're talking about a population drop of an estimated 10 million people.
So the big question is how? How did one man pull the wool over the world's eyes, turning a country 75 times bigger than his own, into his own personal concentration camp for profit? And how on earth was this Holocaust hidden in plain sight for so long? That's what we're going to unpack today. Welcome to Veiled Histories.
All right, let's get into it. The whole thing started with a lie. A brilliant, but deeply cynical lie. See, Leopold was sharp. He knew that just going out and conquering a place wasn't going to fly back in Belgium. So he framed his whole ambition not as colonization, but as this grand, noble humanitarian mission.
He went to the big players at the Berlin Conference in 1884, and he convinced the major powers of Europe and even the United States to back his claim. And he did it with all the right buzzwords. He promised he'd abolish slavery, bring Christianity and civilization right into the heart of Africa, and set up a free trade zone for everyone. In his own words, it was a crusade worthy of this century of progress. Sounds great, right?
But here is the absolute key to this whole thing, and you really have to let this sink in. The Congo Free State, it wasn't a Belgian colony. It wasn't accountable to a government or the Belgian people. No, it was the personal, private property of one man, King Leopold II. He had absolute total control. He answered to nobody.
And the sheer scale of his personal kingdom? It's just mind-boggling. Just look at this comparison. The Congo Free State was massive, over 2 million square kilometers. That's more than 75 times the size of Belgium itself. An entire subcontinent, basically, just handed over to the whims of a single guy.
So for the first few years, the colony was actually kind of a money pit. He was struggling financially. But then, something happened that changed everything. The invention of the inflatable tire. Suddenly there was this massive global boom in demand for rubber. And guess what? The Congo was overflowing with it. This demand is what gave birth to a truly monstrous system, a system that critics would eventually call red rubber.
Okay, so how did this red rubber machine actually work? Well, it was horrifyingly simple and ruthlessly efficient. Step 1, state agents would show up at a village and assign these insane, impossible quotas for collecting rubber. Step 2, the men were then forced, literally at gunpoint, to go deep into the jungle for weeks, sometimes months, to harvest the wild rubber. Step 3, to make sure everyone met these impossible demands, Leopold used his private army, the Force Publique, to unleash a reign of absolute terror. And the result of all this? Pure, unadulterated profit flowing right into Leopold's personal bank accounts.
And the profits, oh man, they were just astronomical. Just between 1896 and 1905, that's less than a decade, Leopold personally pocketed over 70 million Belgian francs. In today's money, that's an almost unbelievable fortune. And every single franc was built on the back of this horrific system of slave labor.
So you have to be wondering, how exactly was the system enforced on the ground? Well, those massive profits were squeezed out through just unimaginable violence. And the main tool for that terror was Leopold's very own private army.
This army was called the Force Publique, and it was a pretty terrifying setup. You had white European officers commanding African soldiers. Now, many of these soldiers weren't there by choice. They were kidnapped as kids, or they were enslaved, or they were mercenaries from other places. Their job was simple and brutal. Get the rubber, by any means necessary. and the cruelty of the force publique, it became legendary. I want to share a piece of testimony from a man named Swambe. It captures the horror. He's talking about an official who made his soldiers do something truly awful to prove they weren't wasting bullets. And here's the sick, barbaric logic behind it all. Bullets were expensive. They had to be shipped all the way from Europe. So, to prove to their bosses that they weren't wasting ammunition on, say, hunting for food, soldiers were required to bring back one severed right hand for every single bullet they fired. It got to the point where baskets filled with human hands became the grim, defining symbol of the Congo Free State.
And if you can believe it, this horrific policy led to something even more monstrous. What if a soldier missed a shot? Or what if they wanted to save their bullets for hunting? Well, they just cut the hand off a living person, a man, a woman, even a small child, to meet their quota. And it didn't stop there. To force the men out into the jungle to collect rubber, their wives and children were often rounded up and held hostage in pens, where so many of them just starved to death.
Look, I know this is incredibly difficult to hear. These details are horrifying, but our whole mission here at Veiled Histories is to bring stories just like this one out of the shadows, because they need to be told. If you believe this work is important, it would mean the world to us if you just take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. That way, you won't miss any of the hidden stories we're trying to bring to light.
For years, Leopold's PR machine was incredible. He managed to keep all of these horrors completely under wraps. But a secret that big? Well, it can't be contained forever. And eventually, the truth started to leak out. The exposure of what was happening in the Congo actually sparked what a lot of people call the very first major international human rights movement of the 20th century.
Now, it didn't happen overnight. It was more of a slow burn, but slowly, the pieces started coming together. You had people like George Washington Williams, who was one of the first to blow the whistle, even coining the phrase crimes against humanity way back in 1890. Then, Joseph Conrad published his novel Heart of Darkness, which was inspired by what he saw there. But the real turning point, the thing that broke the story wide open, was the Casement Report in 1904. It was an official investigation, and it confirmed everyone's worst fears. After that, the global outcry just became too loud to ignore, and in 1908, Leopold was finally forced to hand over his colony to the Belgian state.
And someone like Joseph Conrad, he'd seen it with his own eyes. He'd captained a steamboat on the Congo River. He knew exactly what was behind that so-called civilizing mission. And he didn't mince words. He called it, and this is a quote, "the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience."
So Leopold's direct rule was over. But his ghost? Well, it definitely lingered. The true full scale of the catastrophe he unleashed on the Congo would only really become clear over time. And the debate over what to call it, that's a debate that's still going on today. See, that number, an estimated 10 million deaths, it wasn't just from outright murder, though that was a massive part of it. The system itself created this perfect storm of devastation. You had men forced away from their farms, which led to widespread starvation. People were literally worked to death from exhaustion. Then you had diseases, things like sleeping sickness and smallpox, that just ripped through the weakened population, spread by all the forced movement of people. And on top of all that, the sheer terror and the destruction of families caused the birth rate to just plummet. It was a demographic collapse on every single front. So this all leads to a really difficult question. Should we call this a genocide? I mean, the death toll is certainly on the scale of the Holocaust, but it's complicated. Most historians argue that because Leopold's main goal was profit, not the intentional, planned extermination of a particular people, it doesn't technically fit the UN's strict legal definition of genocide. It was more like, well, one historian called it a slaughter on a staggering scale that was the collateral damage of a greedy, ruthless policy of exploitation. The intent, they argue, was the key difference.
And don't think for a second that this is all just ancient history. It's very much alive. As recently as 2020, the current king of Belgium expressed his deepest regret for what happened, but he still didn't offer a formal apology. And in the last few years, we've seen protests across Belgium leading to Leopold's statues being vandalized and even torn down. It's forcing a really long overdue reckoning with this man who, for so long, many Belgians only knew as the Builder King.
And that's really what this forces us all to do: confront the past. Leopold II built beautiful things in Brussels with money that was soaked in the blood of the Congo. Today, people are tearing his statues down. And that leaves us with a really tough question, one I'll leave with you. How should we remember historical figures who were both builders and butchers?